Beautiful. Welcome back to the Faith, Family, and Football podcast. This time around, we'll be looking at family again, but on the concept of Beit Av. So, Dr. Rao, Beit Av is a Hebrew terminology, and I'm sure most of my listeners won't understand what Beit Av is. But I want to ask you to just share with us the concept of Beit Av from the ancient Near East.
Mhm.
Just how was family seen, looked at, and perceived in that time through the lens of Beit.
Yeah, so the BeitAv is a Hebrew phrase. Beit meaning house, building, Av meaning father, so house of the father. And it goes back to an ancient practice whereby the head of a household, the patriarch, or in Roman terms, the paterfamilias, but in terms of ancient Near Eastern, the patriarch would have a plot of land and would be living upon the plot of land. He'd have children, and his um, his sons would have the opportunity to, once they are married, um, have a part of have a plot in that patriarchal land where they could build a home and get married and raise a family. And so then you'd have the patriarch's home and then his sons' homes on this plot of land. And that's the household of the father, the house of the father, the Beit Av. And so that's a bit of the context that informs actually some important passages in the New Testament, as well as culturally, as we look out in many parts of the world, not North America, well, not Canada, US, or Europe so much, but other parts of the world where that concept of a patriarchal land that's shared is continued. And I think that's a beautiful communal way of living that speaks to the emptiness and the isolationism of the Western individualism that we encounter that really doesn't value extended family to any degree, like in African or Middle Eastern or Asian cultures.
Beautiful. So the concept of Beit Av is very similar to what we call homesteads here in our African context. But I must say at the same time that there's a huge wave of dilution of homesteads as people leave the rural parts of Africa and go into the cities. We actually follow a lot of these Western trends and Western mindsets, and we lose that bed of mindset that we probably some of us grew up with, or we saw our fathers, our parents, and our grandparents live out. Uh, I'll start with Brian. What would you say is a difference between our African way, and I'm talking about a traditional bed of African way of family, with what is the difference with that of the American way of family?
Yeah. Well, I think Dr. Ralph alluded to this with one of his comments toward the end of his most recent comments there. But I just think about on the global stage, the differences between independence and valuing or esteeming that within a culture. Maybe on the other end of the spectrum, the idea of complete codependence. I'm desperate for, I'm dependent on in every way another. And then maybe that middle ground of interdependence, right? So just to think of that continuum for a moment. And I can't help but think of your question, Musa, with that frame in mind and appreciating that, boy, we're wise, I think, to realize the environment that we all are in. And what about our environment is wonderful and healthy. And if I take a biblical lens through it, say it affirms much of what I discern from scripture as it relates to living with one another. But what about maybe my cultural context where I am and the culture that I'm a part of is a foreign land as it relates to the context and I'll say the guidance of scripture. So there's an awakening, I think, that we maybe many of us need, depending on where we're at globally and in the societies we're all coming from. But no doubt about it, the Western culture, the European culture, esteems independence, looking out for number one, that being oneself. It's very individualistic in its applause. So realize if I, and we, for whom this is true, have grown up in that context, there's something that pushes against, uh, our very realities that we've lived in. When I search scripture, in many cases, on the dangers of independence, the idolatry of self,
Mm.
that there's just something, that I need to be retrained in. A renewing of my mind, as Romans 1 might, call out, in this area of life I'm desperate for, whether I know it or not, is how I've increasingly begun to think about and actually internalize this reality in my own life. So it makes me curious and hungry to experience and explore other cultures, really out of that place of longing for recognizing that there's something about the environment I'm in that even I see producing in me and in others around me something that's not great, something that leaves you really hollow, perhaps, even though our cultures might say that is the pinnacle, if you will. Maybe my last comment, my day job allows me to see what it looks like for aging populations in our culture. And it's not lost on me that in the United States, we have long-term care facilities, nursing homes, um,
Mm.
literally dwelling places for elderly people. And as I travel the globe and I look at other cultures, and I don't see, literally do not see in many countries, those buildings that exist for that purpose. Boy, what an interesting mirror
Mm.
that I get to stare at in my community, and a mirror that doesn't exist, I would say, in another culture. And it does make me wonder deeply. In fact, beyond wonder, convinces me, quite frankly, that we've got some things a bit backwards.
Mm.
And I think it stems from this individualistic idolatry of self paradigm, that the Western world, for the most part, has succumbed to.
Mm.
Wow, that's very interesting. I remember I had a conversation, I think a couple of months ago, around the same subject. And after thinking about it, I came to a conclusion that I don't know that I was talking to you, Dr. Ralph, or somebody else, I don't know, but I came to a conclusion that in the West, you value productivity.
Mm.
The more people become less productive, the less valuable they become.
Mm.
Here in Africa and in our cultural lenses, we value age. The older we value wisdom in a sense.
Mm.
So the older people become, the more important they become.
Mm.
But in the West, it seems like the older they become, the less important they become because they're not as productive as it were. But for us, it's wisdom that's the number one value. And as people get older, we coalesce around them because we feel like we'll learn a lot from them. What do you think about this statement? I'll start with Dr. Ralph. Do you think there's truth in what I've said?
Mm. Yeah, that's a fascinating contrast. And whether it's valuing productivity or a host of other factors that, merge to um, create this cultural expectation that as people get older, they no longer have maybe this productive value for society. Yeah. And I just love the African context, and I love the concept of wisdom. That's what is, and even in Canada and our Indigenous peoples, that's the cultural expectation is that the elders are highly, highly valued and sought out and given honor and respect in our Western society. Those who are old they lose respect as they get older. They're not seen as being able to contribute in a meaningful way because I think part of it is in our Western society, we value newness, technology. We need to keep producing and developing and learning new things. The old things, well, that's what was. We want what is and what is to come, in a
Mm.
sense. And it's so easy then to put on the sidelines, the elderly who are not keeping pace with technology, so to speak, with developments that are so important in our Western society.
Brian, do you see value in that statement?
See value in the statement, and I'm even picking up on a word that you used in particular, Musa, that being wisdom. And I'm going to go back to the book of Proverbs, and I think about the distinction of knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And the distinctions
Mm-hmm.
of this, right? They're spoken to together in several portions of scripture, but they stand on their own, I think. And Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph, as you said a moment ago, if you just look at societies in the last 100 years and you think about the industrial revolution, productivity, producing things, and then if you look at the last 25, 30 years, the technology revolution, um, what does that do, to, and probably many other turns of societies before those, for the record, but what does that do to an older person through different millennia? There's an element of understanding and of knowledge that admittedly is hard to keep up with, right? Whether it's cognitive, slowing down, that's very natural to the aging process. But it causes us, maybe in the face of valuing productivity, as you said, Musa, to discount a category of people, perhaps older or elderly people. And it might have most to do with the fact that they might not have knowledge or understanding of these new things. But boy, you used the word wisdom there a few minutes ago. And if you put on a teeter-totter the idea of productivity versus wisdom, I think there's something that totally resonates with me about that. And I think culturally, depending on the place in the globe you find yourself, um, there's maybe a quickness to devalue wisdom that could transcend those turns of revolutions in societies over time. And we may emphasize, to your point, Dr. Ralph, productivity based on knowledge and understanding, and how do I do these things now in a new world? But boy, we sure are throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think, if we don't take just a moment and recognize the profound wisdom that can come from people who've lived through many experiences and who can speak in for all times, all
Mm-hmm.
situations. I think it's short-sighted to not esteem that.
Yeah. Can we say that the West has not put a price on wisdom, and then they put so much value on knowledge?
Mhm.
I think there's a fairness to that.
Mhm.
I think knowledge and understanding and its value is more quickly seeable, right? So if you're living in a
Yeah.
fast-paced culture and a return on investment mindset,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
show me the value. And the value of
Yeah.
wisdom sometimes takes time to reveal itself, right?
Mm.
Mm.
That's a really good point. Mhm.
Wow. Wow. Wisdom comes out of a lot of simmering, like a hen sitting on its eggs over time, looking very unproductive and yet very productive,
You bet.
like watching the fish.
Good, Musa.
Oh my God, I like it. So, Brian, I've been in your home more than once, and I've seen how your kids, even your adult kids and their families, coalesce around you guys, you and Tamara, so closely. And I see that is somewhat, I mean, not exact, but somewhat that speaks to me a bit of a Beit Av type of a situation. How do you connect the Beit Av with what happens in your home? Because I see
Hmm.
there's a lot of that happening. Do you see any connection?
Yeah. I am and have been for 15 years just struck with the concept of BeitAv, for the record. So very, familiar as we think about what that meant in its context
Yeah.
originally. And what about that can be borrowed for all times? But what about that also has its downsides or maybe its shortcomings? Much
Hmm.
we could talk about on that front, but I am inspired by the concept of BeitAv for sure as it relates to identity. I alluded to that word a little while ago with family and all of, I hope, the good things that can come from a place of identity and healthy security. Again, I say that recognizing not codependence, not independence, but interdependence, just flourishing together and the potential of what living in community uh, can do to form that in every one of us. And I look at the gift, and I'll call it that, of the design of family and what in the healthiest of cases that can afford to every one of us. And man, I am committed to doing my dead level best to being a contributor to a family, a regular part of a family where all of those possibilities of sanctification, of formation, of transformation, can be at hand, and even restoration. Um, those are longings that I have for the community of family. And I look at family, and we can talk about this more later, I'm sure, but as just a profound gift that
Mhm.
is here from the day we're born to the day we die.
Hmm.
And we can take advantage of that gift, or we could squander that gift, or we could, I think, fall prey to what maybe the enemy, if you will, would long to see happen with a family, just discrediting it, or not stewarding it, maybe for its full potential even. Um, so those are various rambling thoughts, I'll admit, but the concept of Beit Av and togetherness in coming together and being together and doing life with one another, um, I've found it to be just profoundly valuable in my own life because of things that I've needed in terms of my own growth and development. And I'm saying, even as a dad, when I look at my kids and what they teach me, and my grandkids and what they're teaching me, and when I look up a generation to my parents and what they've taught me, I want to be faithful with the possibility of what family in its best design can be.
Hmm.
Beautiful. So, Dr. Alf, the same question, but if I was to reduce Beit Av to two concepts, passing down of wisdom and also apprenticeship, if these are the two words that could represent Beit Av in this setting,
Mhm.
uh, you probably yesterday or today, I'm not sure. You talked about your kids having come to visit you guys with their families and whatnot. Uh, how and in what ways do you think the concept of Beit Av, but to reduce it to wisdom and apprenticeship, happen in your family? Because now the idea is to try and bring it home now.
Mhm.
Because yeah. Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, apprenticeship is actually an interesting term that you introduce in terms of the Beit Av kind of picture. Um, I appreciate what Brian was sharing just about, some of the values of a Beit Av, how that is transferable to a family context. The idea of
Mhm.
there's a sense of you create, hands that catch the children. There's this sense of security they have, knowing that there's somebody there to back them up. That, Brian talked about the word interdependence, that they're independent, but yet they have a connection of interdependence, knowing that you're always there for them. And a rabbi with an apprentice, so to speak, um, would be always there for his disciples, and because they're doing life together. And I don't know if you've watched the movie, the series The Chosen. It's pretty big here in North America. And one of the things that struck me was I always thought the disciples were constantly with Jesus. It was 3 years. They're always living with him. They're just 3 years hanging out, sleeping under the stars. And in The Chosen, they show how they would go out for certain ministry times, and then the disciples would go back to their families and sort of do life and then come back with Jesus. Um, and I think that's sort of a good picture of the family as this discipleship, this apprenticeship model where there's the times together, where there's this love and security, and there's this building into each other and affirming each other's identity, and sort of preparing people to be sent back out again. Your kids are sent back out again at the world, and so this family structure where you as the mother and father create a sense of complete commitment to your children, where they know that regardless of what mistakes they make, there's always mom and dad who will be there to help pray with them, support them, love them, encourage them, give wisdom, advice based on our own life journeys and learnings, but yet never to smother them and say, well, stay within the compound here. We have to meet every week as a family. If you don't, you're betraying the family system. That's codependence.
Yeah.
But it's interdependence is that come be yourself. We want to breathe life into you, fan that flame that God's put into you, and let you feel free to go out again and be who you need to be in the world. But always knowing that you're part of this metaphorical Beit Av. You're always connected to us, and that will never, ever stop. One thing I always tell to my kids when they're younger, I said, why does daddy love you? So, and I taught them to say, because you're my child. And so, will you ever stop being my child? Well, no. So will daddy ever stop loving you? I guess not. Okay, there you go. So just to build that security, right? That it's love you because of who you are, not because of what you do.
Well said.
So wonderful. I like this. So as we wind out, I just it's so interesting that Solomon, the teacher, say there's nothing new on the earth, right? Everything that is has been. We look at technology and how things have changed today. I'm like, okay, Solomon, really? Everything that is has been? Or was he referring to wisdom? What was he talking about? Let's use, the last 5 minutes, let's just wind down on that. Let's have comments. Dr. Ralph and then Brian.
So what does wisdom boil down to?
No, let's comment on Solomon. Said everything, there's nothing new. Everything that is has been.
Right.
What was he talking about? Because there's Facebook today.
Yeah.
And
yeah, man.
So was he talking about wisdom or knowledge?
Well, basically, nothing new under the sun. He's really reinforcing the human experience keeps cycling. We put on, different fashions. We have different ways of living out humanness, but the basic experience of being human, with all its fears, failures, foibles, and possibilities, just keeps cycling. Every generation, it's the same thing that emerges with different, might say, colors and fabrics and everything else, but it's still what it means to be human is consistent. And wisdom is so crucial to understanding what does it mean to be human. And I think, wisdom literature is all focused generally on God as creator. And so wisdom is based in God as creator, recognizing that the essence of wisdom is in creation. And as his creation, we want to be those people who reflect God's image in good ways.
Beautiful. Brian?
Yeah. Excellent. So well said, Ralph. I affirm that in so many ways. I wish I could have been there when Solomon said those things and hear and ask him some follow-up questions, right? Like, what are you thinking about as you say this? But I have to believe, to Ralph's point, he looked backwards from the stories he was told from generations before. He looked around at the moment he found himself in, and he's like, here we go again. There's nothing new under the sun. That in my own thinking and in my own contemplation of trying to empathize with the moment that he found himself in, he just sees turns, right? He sees turns of things that repeat themselves. And way back to your question, Musa, I have to believe it has a lot more to do with those things that transcend time, right? And they're not going to be things like Facebook and electric cars, among many, many, many other advances in societies. But boy, there's an undercurrent, right? There's an undercurrent that finds its way throughout all those things, and certainly had to be in the camp, perhaps of wisdom, but maybe even beyond wisdom, just principles that endure, through all time.
Beautiful. I think the conclusion of the matter is old people are important. As we close this this section. Yeah. So thank you, guys. We're gonna close with this by saying old people are important because they have understood, they've seen through the ups and downs of life. And I think the ups and downs of life that you're gonna go through, that we are young people are gonna go through, they could help us a bit or a lot on how to deal with some of them, regardless of what new technologies have been discovered or what new things are there. Thank you. Bye. See you on the other side.
All right, blessings.